You know, I'm a pretty big fan of the Lupin III series, so when Part 5 came out in spring of 2018, I was very excited about what a more modern take on the Lupin franchise would look like. The result was a really good show that both managed to stick to the roots of what makes Lupin so good in the first place, as well as bringing Lupin into the digital age. But sadly, this series went over a lot of people's heads, not because Lupin isn't very well known, but more because the TV anime first started back in 1971. This meant that a lot of people didn't know how to get into the show, and navigating their way through that many sequels, spin-offs, and movies is a pretty big task. But thankfully, the Anime Top Scholar is here to tell you how you can get into Lupin III. So without any further ado, let's get to it. The first and most obvious way to get into Lupin is to just start at the beginning with Part 1. Now, technically the beginning is the 12-minute pilot film from 1969, but unless you really want to see it, there's no need, as it was only made to assess people's interest in a possible Lupin anime. Now, getting into Lupin through the original series can be a bit of a challenge. Not only are you going to have to deal with low quality video and audio, but if you're planning to go through from Part 1 all the way to Part 5, this is going to be a bit of a task since the entire main series of Lupin as of right now is sitting at a total of 276 episodes, spanning almost 40 years at this point. And that's not even taking into account all the spin-offs, movies, and specials that have been released in between the main series. The benefits to starting at Part 1, however, is that it's the shortest of all the main series, sitting at only 23 episodes. You're also going to get to see where the show started and how it evolved, as well as being able to pick up on all the callbacks in the later series. Part 1 is where I originally started with Lupin III, and I can say that it takes some getting used to. Both the video and audio quality, as well as the more limited animation, can put you off a bit if you're not used to it. But even still, I found it entertaining. I would recommend starting here if you're already planning to go through all 5 parts of Lupin. The second way is arguably the most popular way to get into Lupin, and that is through the movie Castle of Cagliostro. You might have already heard of this movie through other anime YouTubers, but if you haven't, this movie is pretty famous. But it's not only famous because it's a Lupin movie, but also because it was the legendary director Hayao Miyazaki's full directorial debut. I say full directorial debut since he and Isao Takahata did take over as directors on Part 1 after Masaki Osumi stepped down due to disagreements on how to adapt Lupin. Like I said, this movie is very popular and definitely the easiest way to get into Lupin since it's not that much of a time investment, being only 1 hour and 40 minutes long. Personally, it's not my favorite version of Lupin, but I still think it's a good starting point, and even if you don't want to start it with this movie, you should absolutely come back to it at some point. The third way to get into Lupin is through the spin-off series The Woman Called Fujiko Mine. This 13-episode series from 2012 was directed by Sayo Yamamoto of Michiko to Hatchin and Yuri on Ice fame. It tells the story of the beautiful thief Fujiko Mine and how she first met Lupin. This version is definitely more adult than any of the others on this list. There's sex, drugs, and violence aplenty. The idea was to make this version to be more similar to the adult themes of the manga, where the main series is meant to be more family friendly. The only real problem with this series is that it clashes with Part 1 and how the gang met in that series. But if you ask me, I prefer this version. Fujiko is a pretty cool character in the main series, but she really shines in this one. The Woman Called Fujiko Mine is one of my favorite anime and my favorite Lupin show. It's the one I recommend the most to people who want to check out Lupin III. The fourth and final way to get into Lupin is through the most recent iteration of the series, in Lupin III Part 5. Like I said in the beginning, Lupin III Part 5 is a modern take on Lupin, showing us how the gang's methods have changed with the introduction of new technology and the internet, while also asking the question of, is old school gentleman thieves outdated? There's honestly very little wrong with just starting here. It gives you sufficient background on the characters while still keeping their playful personalities that we've come to know and love over the years, although a little bit toned down from the first versions and some of the early movies. The only downside is that you will miss out on a lot of the cool callbacks they do to previous Lupin series, movies, locations, characters, so on and so forth. But even without these, Lupin III Part 5 is a really good and fun show to watch, and I would still highly recommend it. It's also only 24 episodes, so not that long. I would also recommend starting here if you just want to get a taste of what Lupin is. It stays true to its roots while still being more modern. I think especially more recent anime fans will get more enjoyment out of this than they would, let's say, the 70s version. So those are in my opinion the 4 best ways to get into Lupin. But honestly, you can start wherever you feel like. Lupin has always been episodic with very little carryover and overarching plot, so you're not missing any vital information. My recommendation for where to start would be either at the spin-off The Woman Called Fujiko Mine, as I think it's the best Lupin anime, or to start with part 5 if you want to start with the main series. But anyways, hopefully this video made you feel like checking out Lupin III. And if it did, let me know in the comments. Also, if you've already seen Lupin, what's your favorite season, movie, or special? If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like, and subscribe for more anime related content from the anime top scholar himself.